Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Breaking Points. Sagar is out. I don't know if I can disclose the reason that he's out.
We can. He just responded.
He just messaged?
He just responded.
So he's recording with Tucker right now in Maine, reacting actually to the interview that Tucker just dropped with the president of Iran. So Sagar will be back on Wednesday. So we've got the wonderful and brilliant Emily Chishchinsky in today for Sagar.
You're welcome, everyone. No, I'm excited to hear all about Sagar's. First of all, I'm excited to listen to Sagar's conversation with Tucker and to hear all about what went on.
Yeah, indeed. And I'm going to try to get Dr. Parsi on also to react to that interview once we've had a chance to review it. But that certainly will be in the show tomorrow. A lot in the show today. The death toll continues to rise after those horrific floods in Texas. So we'll tell you the latest there, show you some of the truly horrifying images, and also all of the questions over whether the response was impacted and the death toll increased by those cuts made by DOGE at the beginning of this administration. Speaking of Elon, he is officially launching the America Party, or at least he says that he is. What will that mean politically? We also have, this is sort of an Elon-linked story as well. Trump says, Emily, there is no Epstein conspiracy. The Trump DOJ saying there was no client list. He definitely killed himself, releasing some video and a report. We can all just put that to bed, nothing to see here.
We've now have, what, 10 hours of video they released last night?
Yeah.
So we'll get into it, but basically this was a Sunday night news dump to Axios for some reason about how they're just fully closing the Epstein investigation.
Yes.
6 months into the Trump presidency. No new information. Everything's fine.
Right. No conspiracy.
Don't worry about
fine.
it.
It's fine. I don't know why Ghislaine Maxwell's in prison then. If there was no conspiracy, who was she trafficking to?
I wish her well. That's not what Trump said a few years ago.
Yeah,
well.
That's exactly what he said. And it's Elon linked, of course, because back when they originally had their big blow up, he said Trump is in the Epstein files, and that was sort of like the nuclear bomb.
Yep.
And so now they're feuding again, and this is coming out, and Bibi Netanyahu is in town, which, by the way, later in the show, we're going to talk to Jeremy Scahill about the implications, the potential for a ceasefire, what's going on with Iran as Bibi comes back to town. We're also going to take a look at a couple of media stories, Zohran Mamdani being attacked by the New York Times. Really interesting story, this one.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
A lot of layers to peel back.
There are indeed. And this is all over the boxes he checked when he was applying to Columbia University, school, by the way, he didn't even get into. But so there's a lot going on there. We also have Tim Dillon and Joe Rogan unhappy with the Trump administration over immigration, specifically Rogan also talking a bit about Gaza. So really interesting always to dig into that. And then Emily and I are going to do an AMA live after this show. For those of you who are not premium members, if you want to become premium members and be able to access all of those AMAs, breakingpoints.com. We so appreciate all of your support. And with that, let's go ahead and jump into the very latest out of Texas, where we can put some of these images of the flooding and the aftermath of the flooding in Texas Hill Country right near San Antonio up on the screen. As of this morning, we know the death toll is at least 81. This marks one of the deadliest floods in this country in a century. Now, this is an area where flooding is not unknown, but the rapidity and the extent of the flooding here was absolutely catastrophic, made worse by the fact that you had a lot of families on vacation in campers near this river, and also, tragically, a girls' summer camp. You can see here, this is a father who is searching amid the debris here for his 8-year-old daughter who continues to be missing. We know there are still dozens of people who are unaccounted for, including 10 from this camp. I believe those were 9 girls and 1 camp counselor who continue to be missing from that camp. And the death toll here, obviously utterly devastating and made even more so by the fact that so many children were impacted. We're going to get to some of the political questions here, of course, and immediately people turn to, hey, you guys, Republican Trump administration, you just cut a bunch of positions at the National Weather Service. You just cut a bunch of positions at these local offices that are not only supposed to handle the weather forecast, but also supposed to communicate with the community. Is that part of why this death toll is so high? But before we get to that, Emily, just your reaction to the horror coming out of Texas right now.
You know, I think like a lot of people, I spent the weekend basically trying to avoid these stories. The father of the video of the father that we just saw in particular is the one
unimaginable.
Yeah, that one just stayed with me. We didn't hear it, but the audio, he says something to the extent of, "I know she was here," and the fact that there's still 10 girls unaccounted for, or 10 people unaccounted for from the camp. Just thinking about what the families are going through as you're sifting through debris from a flood, looking for little girls, what the first responders whose job it is to look for these little girls in the floodwaters. Two of them, sisters, were found clutching each other in their arms. I mean, this is one of the worst stories I think anyone can remember reading in a long, long time, or living in a long time.
Hopes are fading that they're going to find additional survivors at this point. And the rescuers are concerned also because there's more rain in the forecast, another significant rainfall in the forecast for today. So, we are all certainly thinking about those families who are impacted, those families who are still holding out hope that their loved ones will be found. And there was one remarkable rescue story just recently, a young girl, I think, who survived clinging to a mattress. So, and there have been obviously stories of absolute heroism from the rescuers. I know one in particular rescued like 150 girls at this camp. So just absolutely horrific. At the same time, as I said, a lot of questions here about what went wrong. And there's a lot of layers because, first of all, you have the question of, okay, the forecast was wrong. The forecast underestimated the amount of rainfall by about half. And so you're talking about very different scenario when it's 6 inches of rain, still a lot of rain, versus 12 inches, which is what ultimately fell. You have questions about that, so that would be the National Weather Service. You also have questions about, okay, well, did the right warnings go out at the right time? This was all complicated by the fact that this was unfolding at night, so of course you have people who are asleep. So they may not necessarily be receiving all of those alerts that are going out. And then the other layer is, okay, then you also have in these local offices, people whose job it is to communicate with the community and make sure the community is prepared in these events. So were those relationships still active? Was that communication happening in the way that it could so that the community could fully prepare? Texas officials came out pretty hot, blasting the National Weather Service for the inability to predict the amount of rainfall that actually fell here. Let's go ahead and take a listen to a little bit of that.
The original forecast that we received on Wednesday from the National Weather Service predicted 3 to 6 inches of rain in the Concho Valley and 4 to 8 inches of rain in the Hill Country. We worked with our own meteorologists to fine-tune that weather statement, and as many of you know, and many of you in broadcast journalism and meteorology, you can go back and look at your own forecast, and the amount of rain that fell in this specific location was never in any of those forecasts.
This rain event sat on top of that and dumped more rain than what was forecasted on both of those forks. When we got the report, it was about 7 feet or so on the South Fork, and within a matter of minutes, it was up to 29 feet, and all of that converged at the Guadalupe, and that's where we saw those very quick rise in flood.
But listen, everybody got the forecast from the National Weather Service, right? You all got it. You're all in media. You got that forecast. It did not predict the amount of rain that we saw.
So, Emily, look, sometimes weather forecasters, sometimes they get it wrong. But you also can't help but look at the fact that the National Weather Service took significant hits from DOGE and asked the question, would they have been better able to estimate the amount of rainfall if they had full capacity here? So what is your, what is your reaction to that from these Texas officials who, by the way, I mean, many of these Texas officials are Republicans who supported the cuts. So the blame shifting here is also a little bit rich.
Yeah, in times like this, I always like to go to people in the area who have some, like for Matt Lanza is a meteorologist, a Texas-based meteorologist, and he posted on X in response to the Homeland Security Twitter feed, they posted this long thread about 12 hours ago saying the mainstream media is deliberately lying about the events leading up to the catastrophic flooding in Texas. He responds and says the, quote, MSM isn't lying. They're doing their job by asking completely valid and crucial questions since the admin has proposed zeroing out essentially all NOAA research in the 2026 budget and has fired or taken buyouts of hundreds of NWS employees in recent months. He, though, has an interesting take. He says, while the local NWS office did good work during this event, the reality is that these questions are perfectly valid and and reasonable given the circumstances. And yes, the office is still understaffed, if not comparable to worse offices. He expanded on this in a super interesting Substack where he has basically complicated meteorological language broken down in a more understandable way about how you had just this, you had such I'm trying to avoid using the phrase perfect storm, but like really that's what you had for something between 1 and 4 in the morning to escalate like it did in ways that just you can predict, but it's when you have an area that's so prone to flooding, you have like 8 out of 10 times you get a flash flood warning, and sometimes it's bad, but it's never this bad. And so he says, did budget cuts play a role? No. In this particular case, we have seen absolutely nothing to suggest that current staffing or budget issues with NOAA and the NWS played any role at all in this event. Then he goes on to say, in fact, weather balloon launches played a vital role in forecast messaging on Thursday night as the event was beginning to unfold. But he said, use this event as a symbol of the value of NOAA and NWS bring to society, understanding that as horrific and as this is, yes, it could have always been worse. So where I find myself is I think the questions are entirely valid, especially because, Krystal, you alluded to this just moments ago. It now seems like where the focus should be is on what happened after the forecasting and as these warnings were starting to hit. It's 1 in the morning, people are asleep, there's summer camps, there are children along the riverbanks. Was the message conveyed in ways that were reasonable? I think these are entirely legitimate questions. So we'll see as this comes out exactly what happened. But when Republicans talk about cutting the administrative state, when people like me talk about cutting the administrative state, and events like this happen, you always have to own it. I mean, you always have to own it when it looks like there's a correlation. I don't know, I'm not convinced that there is in this case, and I don't have any particular position on whether the National Weather Service was overstaffed. I have no idea. But you always end up politically on the hook. Yeah.
Let's go ahead and put the New York Times up on the specifics regarding those vacancies in the local offices. So they said as floods hit, key roles were vacant at the Weather Service. Crucial positions at the local offices in the National Weather Service were unfilled as severe rainfall inundated parts of central Texas. Their San Angelo office, which is responsible for some of the areas hit hardest by Friday's flooding, they were missing a senior hydrologist, a staff forecaster, and a meteorologist in charge, according to the legislative director for the National Weather Service Employees Organization. That is the union that represents those workers. The nearby San Antonio office, which covers other areas that were hit by the floods, also had significant vacancies, including, and this is the one that people have really focused in on specifically, a warning coordination meteorologist and science officer. Staff members in those positions are meant to work with local emergency managers to plan for floods, including when and how to warn local residents and help them evacuate. That office's warning coordination meteorologist left on April 30 after taking the early retirement package. So that was remember the fork in the road email that went out from Elon, from DOGE. So this guy took that offer. They used that offer, of course, to reduce the number of federal employees overall, and they did not rehire someone. They go on to say under the Trump administration, so overall, the Weather Service, like other federal agencies, has been pushed to reduce its number of employees. By this spring, through layoffs and retirements, the Weather Service had lost nearly 600 people. That's from a workforce that was only 4,000. So 600 down to 4,000 is a very significant cut. And so this individual in particular who took the early retirement package, I watched videos of some of the local meteorologists talking about, like, this is the guy we know. Mm-hmm. This is the guy we're constantly in communication with and talking about, and this is the person that the community knows. So sometimes it is impossible to know what the impact is ultimately of that person's departure, because even if you had filled that slot, you don't have that individual who had all of these relationships over all of those many years and may have known to do something that was not strictly inside of the protocol, but would have been thinking, oh my God, this summer camp, I got to let them know. There's a lot of questions like that I think will probably forever be unanswered about the actual impact of these cuts. let's go ahead and put the local reporting, the next piece up on the screen here, just to see how quickly this flooding escalated, which is horrifying. You can see this chart here. This is from the Texas Tribune. They say in a Texas region prone to catastrophic floods, questions grow about the lack of warning. And you can see how quickly and how rapidly this escalated, with the river reaching its peak of 36 feet in height at 7 a.m. on July 4th, leading to absolute devastation and catastrophe. And so, Texas Tribune is not just the New York Times and national outlets, it's also, Texas Tribune that are asking some of these same questions about whether or not these cuts played a role in the absolutely devastating toll. Again, one of the worst floods in terms of death toll in a century that unfolded here. And of course, there's a climate change question to this, as well as we see these catastrophic extreme weather events, these once in 100-year floods happening on now a decade by decade basis more and more frequently. That's, a big piece of this. And then the other part as well is you have the Trump administration not only cutting not only cutting the National Weather Service, but also wanting to cut FEMA so that in the wake of these horrific tragedies, you also have a lessened ability to help people who have survived and help communities be able to rebuild. Let's go ahead and go to A4. Trump yesterday evening got asked some of these questions, both about FEMA and about whether the cuts impacted the response and, created more death and destruction in the wake of these floods. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
Are you investigating whether some of the cuts to the federal government left key vacancies at the National Weather Service or in the emergency coordination?
No, they did not. They did. I'll tell you, if you look at that what a situation that all is, and that was really the Biden setup. That was not our setup, but I wouldn't blame Biden for it either. I would just say this is a 100-year catastrophe, and it's just so horrible to watch.
Are you still planning to phase out FEMA?
Well, FEMA is something we can talk about later, but right now they're busy working, so we'll leave it at that. Go ahead.
And Emily, to me, it's particularly sick because Trump ran aggressively on the response to Hurricane Helene, claiming that the Biden administration didn't do enough there, which there may well have been failures from the Biden administration. FEMA, I'm honestly not certain if there was more that they could have done there or not. But he really positioned himself in the closing days of the campaign as someone who is going to be better on disaster preparedness and disaster recovery. And then as soon as he gets in office, runs in the polar opposite direction. And not only has he been talking about getting rid of FEMA altogether and just sending it to the states, they're also diverting FEMA funds to, for example, building Alligator Alcatraz right now. So again, you not only have the DOGE chainsaw that came in and cut the National Weather Service, cut NOAA. This has been a long-time conservative priority, by the way. It was in Project 2025. This didn't just come out of nowhere. But not only do you have
That's
that.
A9, by the way.
Yeah, we can put that up on the screen. This is something actually Sagar and I were talking about. I think you were talking about it too, even before Trump got elected, when we were talking about Project 2025. There's an ideological project, an attack here on the National Weather Service, which comes both out of an ideological commitment to just cutting the government overall, but also out of ideological opposition to doing anything about the climate crisis. And that's spelled out, quite clearly here, that they feel the National Weather Service is a key part of what they call the climate change alarm industry. And so there was, a concerted effort to go after this. And so sometimes, I think some of the Elon cuts, DOGE cuts, were sort of random and haphazard. This one was planned out. This one was messaged and in advance. Not that they talked a lot about it on the campaign trail, but, Trump, of course, there just shifting it to the side and saying, actually, the water situation there is somehow Biden's fault. Okay.
Well, what's interesting also about this is people remember the leaked video of Russ Vought talking about how the goal was to demoralize bureaucrats. So we talked about some of the cuts, Krystal, earlier this year affecting tornado warnings. And I pulled up an Associated Press article from May that said, as of March, some of the Weather Service offices issuing tornado warnings Friday and Sunday were above the 20% vacancy levels that outside experts have said is a critical threshold. So those are offices with 25%, 29%, 32% vacancy rate, and for example, Wichita. And what's interesting about that vacancy rate, that's positions that are unfilled that they are trying to fill. That is not positions that were cut, which is really the sort of public marketing of DOGE, is that we are slashing, kind of permanently slashing. The idea was the size of the federal government. These are people who were, in all likelihood, to the point that we were just talking about in the Kerrville area, they were driven out of the work. They took early retirements. They decided to go work in the private sector. And so I think it does, Krystal, reflect on DOGE overall. When you say these are positions that are actually not being cut, they're just vacant. They're just completely, like, they're some of these, if it's a vacancy,
right,
that implies that they don't want to get rid of the position because they're still actively filling the position. Right. Which is very different from just slashing the size of the offices totally.
Well, it also speaks to, so for this individual in particular who was known for doing the local coordination and was a veteran and took the early buyout, it also speaks to the fact that a lot of the people that were pushed out were some of the most effective, some of the people that you would actually want to keep and prioritize keeping. So all the language about DOGE, oh, we need to get back to merit, et cetera, et cetera. But then the actual program that they used to go about doing this was almost tailor-made to push out some of the most senior and most valuable individuals throughout the federal government who would be the most difficult to replace. And I went and looked this guy up. He's on LinkedIn. He's now doing, private consulting. Really? He went to the private industry. Yeah, that's exactly what happened here. And so those vacancies continue to remain, but there's a hiring freeze at the agency. So it's not like they have the possibility of hiring in to fill these positions even. And then they also, things like the, remember there was that freeze on any sort of expense reimbursement, so that there was an inability to travel, to coordinate between, from the state office to the local communities, et cetera. So, I was telling you, I was watching this is going to seem like a total diversion, but I promise it connects. I was watching the Titan Submersible documentary on Netflix. And when you see that dude, Stockton Rush, who went down with the ship, the way he went about doing things, and just like there was no cost to all of the, I'm not going to get my submersible classed and inspected by the federal government. I'm not going to play by the rules. I'm an innovator. And he talked about how he molded himself after Elon Musk. There were so many personalities, similarities there, where it's just like these guys think that none of this stuff matters. Like there aren't going to be any real world impacts of their, willingness to cut corners and do things however they want to do them. I mean, you see it with Elon too, with the USAID cuts. He's in total denial that has impacted anyone's lives. Obviously, even if you're someone who doesn't like USAID, you have to be honest and admit, of course, when you pull funding from medicine away from kids who need it, that's going to impact people's lives. And so there were huge warnings here about what this could ultimately mean for life and death. The living, heads of the National Weather Service, all of the previous heads, they put out an open letter. We can put this up on the screen. This is A7, warning of exactly this. They said that NWS staff will have an impossible task to continue their current level of service. Some forecast offices will be so short-staffed they may be forced to go to part-time services. Not only are there fewer forecasters, there are fewer electronic technicians who are responsible for maintaining the critical next radars. Our worst nightmare is that weather forecast offices will be so understaffed there will be needless loss of life. We know that's a nightmare shared by those on the forecasting front lines and by the people who depend on their efforts. So they warned of this. There was actually a warning from a Florida forecaster, again, a veteran meteorologist down in South Florida, that went viral at the time and is now going viral again, because he also is sounding the alarm about what these cuts could mean as we, head right now, we're already into hurricane season. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
When is it going to turn? John, it's not turning. It's coming straight to us. It's going to turn. The turn will come Monday afternoon, Monday evening, into Tuesday. Remember that? That was about 6 years ago. That was Hurricane Dorian, as it was absolutely devastating the Northwest Bahamas as a Category 5, sat over that region for 2 days. It was headed straight west. Lots of people in Florida were concerned the hurricane was heading here. Confidently, I went on TV and I told you, it's going to turn. You don't need to worry. It is going to turn. And I am here to tell you that I am not sure I can do that this year, because of the cuts, the gutting, the sledgehammer attack on science in general, and I could talk about that for a long, long time. Let's talk about the federal government cuts to the National Weather Service and to NOAA. Did you know that Central and South Florida National Weather Service offices are currently basically 20 to 40% understaffed? From Tampa to Key West, including the Miami office, 20 to 40% understaffed. Now, this type of staffing shortage is having impacts across the nation because there's been a nearly 20% reduction in weather balloon launches that carry those radiosondes. And what we're starting to see is that the quality of the forecasts is becoming degraded. There's also a chance, because of some of these cuts, that NOAA Hurricane Hunter aircraft will not be able to fly this year, and with less reconnaissance missions, we may be flying blind. And we may not exactly know how strong a hurricane is before it reaches the coastline, like happened a couple of years ago in Hurricane Otis in Acapulco, Mexico. What you need to do is call your representatives and make sure that these cuts are stopped.
So there you go. Dire warning there. That was, I think, back in February from that South Florida forecaster in the immediate wake of these cuts. And there are a lot of questions about what happened here. And I think it's fair to say we don't know at this point whether the cuts made a difference here or not. But a lot of questions. You can't help but ask, did the cuts to the National Weather Service, these local offices, these vacancies, these individuals who had longtime expertise in this community, longtime relationships in this community, could those people have made a difference here if they hadn't been pushed out, if these offices were not understaffed with these significant vacancies? And it's horrifying to see. And certainly this won't be the last time that these questions are raised either with regard to the National Weather Service or anything else. And, Emily, this is anecdotal, but I will say we were at the beach last week. We tried to plan out like our daily schedule. The forecasts were the worst I have ever seen. They were. When I was looking on the weather app, which gets all of that information, comes from the federal government. And it was just like wildly wrong every single day.
Really?
Yeah. And look, again, weather forecasts in the best of funding times can be wrong. But I look at that, I'm like, this could be DOGE. Like, the reason that this is all wrong could very well be that they just don't have the resources to accurately forecast the way that they used to. And it's, contributes to the sense of, it also, the loss of life here is obviously the critical thing to focus on, and the fact that this is a major possibility, again, as we head into the worst of hurricane season. I think this is a dire warning for the country about the track we're on. And it's also just this sense of decline, like things that we used to be able to do, used to be able to keep planes in the air without crashing into each other, or crashing into a helicopter or whatever. We can't forecast, we can't prepare the way that we could even a decade ago. I mean, it's with horrifying and tragic consequences.
Well, and I'm very curious to see if this creeps into the abundance conversation at all, given that Texas is such a focal point of the debate between Texas, California as an argument for abundance, because Mike Baker, the New York Times, runs down. Yeah, see, he's been running down. He has a thread on X where he's running down all of the apparent, ostensible local cracks that led to the situation that transpired on Friday. And it's pretty interesting. The people didn't want to, for example, pay for what they saw as way too expensive warning signs or warnings sirens. So there are a lot of, I think, important questions that are going to be asked because of all of this. The quick thought on the political component that we were just talking about. I mean, I'm sure that there are defensible cuts to the National Weather Service. I have no idea how many they are. I don't even know what they look like. I'm sure you can find an argument that there would be a more efficient NWS or NOAA or whatever with a couple of precise cuts. Scalpel, not sledgehammers. And that what they ended up saying is DOGE was sort of teetering on the brink. But the Musk mentality has probably damaged the project of making a more efficient federal government for a generation, because now it is inextricably, emotionally, viscerally linked with everything that happens afterwards. Sometimes it'll be fair, sometimes it won't be fair. But either way, the way that I just wanted to make that point that about Stockton Rush that you brought up. I think that's super incisive, because it's this people who come from the tech world who are super online or the highest echelons of business, and they're heirs. I think Stockton Rush was an heir, right? Like,
yeah, he was. Yeah,
right. And just start tinkering with life and death in a way that I think lacks the gravity and the consequence of the decision making, and that I don't know the project of like actually shrinking the scope of the federal government will ever recover from, at least in the next couple decades.
Not to mention, I mean, Elon will tell you, first of all, they didn't save any money.
No. Nope.
None. They cost the federal government money to make it. They made the federal government worse and less efficient, and it costs more money.
Right.
And they just passed the big beautiful bill, which is going to blow up the deficit. So if there was any pretense of, oh, this is all to get our spending under control, because we have such a large debt and deficit, I mean, no, you just made things worse. That's it. That's what you accomplished.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.